Some battles are fought in the streets, others in the courtroom. But the costliest ones leave a trail of destruction far beyond the verdict. From corrupt corporate empires to ruthless drug lords, these 5 legal battles weren't just about justice. They were wars against crime itself. Billions of dollars spent, entire industries shaken, and lives forever changed. Today we take you inside the 5 most expensive legal battles against criminals, cases so massive no one could walk away untouched. From the downfall of Enron's executives to the legendary trials of O.J. Simpson and Bernie Madoff, and from the violent pursuit of Pablo Escobar to the high-security trial of El Chapo, these cases made history, and their price tags were just as shocking as their crimes. Let's dive in. United States versus Enron Executives, the costliest corporate fraud case. The Enron scandal remains one of the most infamous corporate fraud cases in American history, leading to one of the most expensive legal battles ever fought against criminals in the business world. Enron Corporation, once a powerhouse in the energy sector, was brought to its knees due to fraudulent accounting practices, misleading financial statements, and outright deception. The case not only cost billions of dollars, but also shattered investor confidence in corporate America, leading to significant legal reforms. Enron was founded in 1985 as a result of a merger between Houston Natural Gas and InterNorth, quickly rising to become one of the largest energy companies in the world. With a reputation for innovation in the energy sector, Enron expanded into electricity, natural gas, and even broadband. However, behind the scenes, the company was engaging in a massive scheme to inflate its financial performance through a network of shell companies, mark-to-market accounting, and hidden debt. These deceptive practices allowed Enron to report substantial profits while actually incurring significant losses. The company's downfall began in 2001 when financial analysts and journalists started questioning its complex financial statements. Enron's stock, once valued at over $90 per share, plummeted to less than $1 within months, wiping out billions in shareholder value. Employees who had invested their retirement savings into Enron's stock lost everything, and thousands of jobs were destroyed overnight. In December 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy, marking one of the largest corporate collapses in U.S. history. The subsequent investigation uncovered widespread fraud and corruption at the highest levels of the company. The Department of Justice launched a full-scale probe, leading to one of the costliest and most complex white-collar crime cases ever pursued. The legal battle involved hundreds of lawyers, forensic accountants, and federal investigators, racking up legal fees that reached into the hundreds of millions of dollars. At the center of the scandal were top executives, including CEO Jeffrey Skilling, founder Kenneth Lay, and CFO Andrew Fastow. Fastow, who masterminded many of the fraudulent accounting practices, pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges and cooperated with authorities. His testimony was instrumental in securing convictions against Skilling and Lay. Skilling, who aggressively pushed Enron's risky business strategies, was found guilty of fraud, insider trading, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison, though his sentence was later reduced. Kenneth Lay, who had stepped down as CEO but remained influential in the company, was also convicted of fraud and conspiracy but passed away before sentencing, leading to his conviction being vacated. The Enron case had far-reaching consequences beyond the individuals involved. It led to the creation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, a landmark law designed to increase corporate transparency and hold executives accountable for financial misconduct. The law introduced stricter auditing requirements, harsher penalties for fraud, and greater protections for whistleblowers. The financial impact of Enron's collapse was staggering. Shareholders lost an estimated $74 billion, and the company's creditors were left scrambling to recover losses. The legal costs associated with the case, spanning criminal prosecutions, civil lawsuits, and regulatory actions, exceeded hundreds of millions of dollars. Some of the largest financial institutions, including J.P. Morgan Chase and Citigroup, also faced lawsuits for their roles in enabling Enron's fraudulent activities, resulting in settlements totaling billions. Enron's downfall also eroded public trust in major corporations and exposed the vulnerabilities in the financial regulatory system. The scandal served as a wake-up call for investors, regulators, and businesses, highlighting the devastating consequences of unchecked corporate greed. Even years after the case concluded, the lessons from Enron continue to shape corporate governance and financial accountability worldwide. The legal battle against Enron executives set a precedent for prosecuting corporate fraud on a massive scale. It demonstrated that no company or executive, regardless of their status, was above the law. The case remains a cautionary tale of how corporate corruption can lead to financial ruin, job losses, and legal battles that can cost not just billions of dollars, but also public confidence in the system. O.J. Simpson murder trial, the trial of the century. The O.J. Simpson murder trial is one of the most infamous and expensive criminal cases in American history. It captivated the nation with its celebrity defendant, shocking crime, racial tensions, and legal drama. The case revolved around the brutal murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ronald Goldman on June 12, 1994. The former NFL star, actor, and celebrity O.J. Simpson was accused of the crime, leading to an extensive legal battle that cost an estimated $20 million and lasted over a year. On the night of June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were found stabbed to death outside Nicole's home in Brentwood, Los Angeles. The crime scene was gruesome, with overwhelming forensic evidence, including bloody footprints and a black leather glove. O.J. Simpson, who had been divorced from Nicole but had a history of domestic violence against her, quickly became the prime suspect. The police attempted to arrest Simpson on June 17th, but instead of surrendering, he fled in a white Ford Bronco driven by his friend Al Cowlings. The slow-speed chase, broadcast live on national television, was watched by over 95 million Americans. The dramatic pursuit ended at Simpson's home, where he finally surrendered to the police. What followed was one of the most expensive and controversial trials in U.S. history. Simpson assembled a dream team of high-profile defense attorneys, including Johnny Cochran, Robert Shapiro, Alan Dershowitz, and F. Lee Bailey. The prosecution, led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden, argued that Simpson had the motive, opportunity, and means to commit the murders. They presented DNA evidence, including blood samples that matched Simpson's, and a pair of gloves, one found at the crime scene and the other at Simpson's house. Despite the mountain of evidence against Simpson, the defense effectively turned the case into a debate over police misconduct and racial injustice. They argued that the Los Angeles Police Department had a history of racial bias and that Detective Mark Furman, a key investigator, had used racial slurs and possibly tampered with evidence. One of the most memorable moments of the trial came when Simpson was asked to try on the infamous glove found at the crime scene. With millions watching, he struggled to put it on, leading Cochran to famously declare, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." This moment significantly undermined the prosecution's case and shifted public opinion. The trial, which lasted from January 1995 to October 1995, became a media sensation. Television networks provided live coverage, and the case sparked intense debates about race, celebrity privilege, and the criminal justice system. Millions of Americans were divided. Many in the black community saw Simpson as a victim of systemic racism, while others believed he was guilty beyond doubt. On October 3, 1995, after deliberating for just 4 hours, the jury delivered its verdict, not guilty. The courtroom erupted in shock and celebration, reflecting the deep racial and social divisions the case had exposed. While Simpson was acquitted in the criminal trial, he later faced a civil lawsuit filed by the families of Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman. In 1997, a civil jury found him liable for the wrongful deaths and ordered him to pay $33.5 million in damages. The O.J. Simpson trial remains a landmark case in American legal history. It demonstrated how wealth and celebrity could influence the legal system and how racial tensions could shape public perception of justice. The trial also paved the way for modern media coverage of high-profile cases, setting a precedent for the 24-hour news cycle and courtroom television. Despite his acquittal, Simpson's legal troubles didn't end. In 2007, he was arrested in Las Vegas for armed robbery and kidnapping after attempting to recover sports memorabilia he claimed was stolen from him. He was convicted and sentenced to 33 years in prison, serving 9 years before being granted parole in 2017. The cost of the O.J. Simpson legal battle was staggering. The state of California spent millions on the prosecution, while Simpson's defense team reportedly charged over $5 million in legal fees. The case resulted in one of the most expensive and polarizing trials in U.S. history, cementing its legacy as the trial of the century. Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme case, the largest financial fraud in history. The Bernie Madoff scandal is the largest and most expensive financial fraud case in history. Madoff, a former stockbroker and investment advisor, ran the biggest Ponzi scheme ever recorded, defrauding thousands of investors out of an estimated $65 billion. His arrest in December 2008 sent shockwaves through Wall Street, led to a complex legal battle that cost hundreds of millions in legal fees and resulted in the collapse of countless businesses, charities, and personal fortunes. Bernard L. Madoff was a well-respected figure on Wall Street for decades. He founded Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities LLC in 1960 and built a reputation as a brilliant financial expert. He was a pioneer in electronic trading and even served as the chairman of NASDAQ at one point. His firm attracted high-profile clients, including celebrities, hedge funds, and pension funds, all drawn by his promise of consistent and high returns. However, Madoff's entire operation was a fraudulent Ponzi scheme, where he used money from new investors to pay returns to existing ones. Unlike legitimate investments, he never actually traded securities. He simply moved money around to maintain the illusion of profitability. The scheme went undetected for years, in part because of Madoff's reputation and his ability to manipulate financial records. The collapse of Madoff's empire began in late 2008 during the global financial crisis. As the stock market crashed, panicked investors demanded withdrawals totaling billions of dollars, but Madoff could no longer sustain the fraud. On December 10, 2008, he confessed to his 2 sons that his entire business was a sham, and the next day they reported him to federal authorities. On December 11, 2008, Madoff was arrested by the FBI and charged with securities fraud. What followed was one of the most expensive and complex legal battles in financial history. The sheer scale of the fraud meant that authorities had to investigate thousands of transactions, trace billions of dollars, and determine the extent of the damage. The legal proceedings involved dozens of lawsuits, with investors suing Madoff and his associates, financial institutions, and regulatory agencies for failing to detect the fraud. Madoff pleaded guilty in March 2009 to 11 felony charges, including securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. The prosecution argued that Madoff had defrauded more than 37,000 victims across 136 countries, including retirees, charities, and institutional investors. Some victims lost their life savings, while others, like foundations and endowments, were forced to shut down completely. On June 29, 2009, Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison, the maximum penalty allowed. Judge Denny Chin, who oversaw the case, described Madoff's crimes as extraordinarily evil, stating that he had ruined lives and taken advantage of the trust of his investors. The ruling sent a strong message about the consequences of large-scale financial fraud. The cost of the legal battle surrounding Madoff's scheme extended far beyond his trial. The government and bankruptcy courts launched an effort to recover stolen funds and compensate victims. A court-appointed trustee, Irving Picard, spent over a decade tracking down assets, suing banks, and redistributing recovered money to victims. By 2020, over $14 billion had been recovered and returned to defrauded investors, though many victims never regained their full losses. Major banks and financial institutions were also implicated in the scandal, leading to additional lawsuits and settlements. J.P. Morgan Chase, Madoff's primary bank, agreed to pay $2.6 billion in fines and settlements for failing to detect the fraud. Other financial firms were forced to compensate investors who had unknowingly participated in the Ponzi scheme. The Madoff case exposed major failures in financial regulation. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, had received multiple warnings about Madoff's suspiciously consistent returns, but it failed to act. The scandal led to a major overhaul in financial oversight, including stricter auditing requirements and more aggressive enforcement of securities laws. Bernie Madoff remained in prison until his death in April 2021, at the age of 82. Despite his conviction, the damage he caused continued long after his sentencing, with victims still fighting for compensation years later. The financial and legal costs of the Madoff case were astronomical. Between prosecution expenses, lawsuits, investor claims, and regulatory reforms, the total cost exceeded billions of dollars. The scandal became a symbol of unchecked corporate greed, the dangers of lax financial oversight, and the devastating consequences of fraud on a massive scale. Madoff's Ponzi scheme remains the largest financial fraud in history, a reminder that even the most respected figures in finance can be responsible for catastrophic deception. His trial and legal battle changed the landscape of financial regulation and exposed the vulnerabilities of even the most sophisticated investors. Pablo Escobar versus the U.S. and Colombia, the war on the kingpin. Pablo Escobar, the infamous Colombian drug lord and leader of the Medellin cartel, was responsible for one of the most expensive and violent legal battles in history. His empire, built on cocaine trafficking, made him one of the richest and most powerful criminals of all time, with an estimated net worth of $30 billion at his peak. His war against the Colombian government and law enforcement, backed by the United States, led to a decade-long conflict that cost billions of dollars, thousands of lives, and reshaped the global drug trade. Escobar rose to power in the 1970s and 1980s, controlling 80% of the world's cocaine supply. His cartel smuggled tons of cocaine into the U.S. every week, generating immense wealth. Escobar used this money to corrupt politicians, bribe law enforcement, and build a personal army. He presented himself as a Robin Hood figure, funding public projects, housing, and soccer stadiums in Colombia, which earned him the support of the poor. However, his criminal empire was built on violence and terror. Escobar was responsible for assassinations, bombings, and mass killings of anyone who opposed him. His war against the Colombian government intensified in the late 1980s and early 1990s as authorities, supported by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, tried to bring him to justice. One of the most expensive and brutal legal battles in history began when the Colombian government attempted to extradite Escobar to the United States. In response, Escobar declared war on the government, ordering the assassination of politicians, judges, journalists, and law enforcement officials. He bombed government buildings, hijacked planes, and even blew up Avianca Flight 203 in 1989, killing 110 people. His most notorious attack was the bombing of the Colombian Department of Security building in 1989, killing nearly 100 people and injuring over 1,000. The U.S. and Colombian governments spent billions of dollars trying to dismantle Escobar's empire. Operation Spectrum and Operation Search Block were launched, involving elite Colombian forces, U.S. intelligence agencies, and special military units. The DEA worked closely with Colombian authorities to track Escobar's movements, disrupt his financial network, and take down his associates. In 1991, under pressure from increasing violence, the Colombian government offered Escobar a controversial deal. If he surrendered, he would avoid extradition to the U.S. and serve time in a custom-built prison of his choice. Escobar agreed and was confined to La Catedral, a luxurious, self-designed prison equipped with a nightclub, spa, and even a soccer field. However, when authorities attempted to transfer him to a real prison in 1992, Escobar escaped, sparking the most expensive manhunt in history. For 16 months, Escobar was the most wanted man in the world. The Colombian government, backed by the CIA, DEA, and U.S. military, deployed thousands of soldiers and intelligence operatives to track him down. The search cost hundreds of millions of dollars as authorities intercepted cartel communications, raided safe houses, and hunted Escobar's allies. The Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar, a vigilante group composed of his rivals and former associates, also waged a brutal campaign against him, assassinating his cartel members and destroying his operations. On December 2, 1993, after a massive surveillance operation, Colombian forces located Escobar in Medellin. In a final confrontation, he was shot and killed on the rooftops while trying to escape. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy continued to shape the drug trade for decades. The cost of the war against Escobar was staggering. The U.S. spent billions funding the Colombian government's fight against drug cartels, providing military aid, intelligence, and special operations forces. The Colombian government lost thousands of soldiers, police officers, and civilians in the battle against Escobar's reign of terror. The legal expenses, military operations, and economic damage caused by his cartel surpassed billions of dollars, making it one of the costliest criminal pursuits in history. Despite Escobar's death, the drug trade did not end. The Cali cartel and other criminal organizations quickly took over, and Colombia remained a major drug trafficking hub. However, the pursuit of Escobar changed the way governments combat organized crime, leading to new international policies on drug enforcement, intelligence sharing, and cartel dismantling. The war against Pablo Escobar remains one of the most expensive, violent, and complex criminal pursuits ever recorded. It demonstrated the power of organized crime, the limitations of law enforcement, and the devastating impact of the global drug trade. His life and downfall continue to inspire books, movies, and debates about the war on drugs and the cost of fighting criminal empires. El Chapo's Trial, the most expensive drug lord prosecution. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the notorious leader of the Sinaloa cartel, was responsible for one of the most expensive and complex legal battles in history. His drug empire spanned continents, trafficking hundreds of tons of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl into the United States. His capture, extradition, and trial cost the U.S. government hundreds of millions of dollars, involving years of investigations, high-risk operations, and an unprecedented security effort to bring him to justice. El Chapo's rise to power in the 1980s and 1990s saw him become the world's most powerful drug trafficker, earning an estimated $14 billion from illegal narcotics. The Sinaloa cartel became the most dominant criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere, using tunnels, submarines, and hidden compartments in vehicles to smuggle drugs across the U.S.-Mexico border. Guzman operated with ruthless efficiency, ordering the murders of rivals, law enforcement officials, and even civilians to maintain control of his empire. Despite multiple arrests, El Chapo repeatedly escaped from maximum security prisons, humiliating Mexican authorities. His first escape in 2001 involved bribing prison guards, allowing him to simply walk out in a laundry cart. After being recaptured in 2014, he escaped again in 2015, using a sophisticated mile-long tunnel dug directly into his prison cell. This escape, which took over a year of planning, cost millions of dollars and showcased the Sinaloa cartel's ability to outmaneuver law enforcement. His final capture in 2016 was a high-stakes military operation involving Mexican Marines, U.S. DEA agents, and intelligence operatives. The raid, known as Operation Black Swan, took place in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, after authorities tracked him through intercepted phone calls and surveillance drones. He was quickly extradited to the United States in 2017, setting the stage for one of the most expensive criminal trials in history. The trial of El Chapo, held in Brooklyn, New York, was an extraordinary security operation. Authorities feared that Guzman, known for bribing officials and escaping prisons, might attempt another daring escape or order assassinations from inside prison. The trial venue was surrounded by heavily armed federal marshals, and each time Guzman was transported to court, entire city blocks in New York were shut down. The legal costs of the trial, security measures, and investigations ran into hundreds of millions of dollars, making it one of the most expensive federal prosecutions ever. The trial itself lasted 3 months, November 2018, February 2019, with testimony from 56 witnesses, including 14 former cartel members who turned informants. Prosecutors presented 300,000 pages of documents, thousands of wiretapped phone calls, and dramatic first-hand accounts of Guzman's brutal tactics. Witnesses described how he personally ordered torture, beheadings, and assassinations, including that of a cartel member who was buried alive. Guzman's defense team, led by high-profile attorney Jeffrey Lichtman, attempted to argue that he was a scapegoat and that the real leader of the Sinaloa cartel was Ismael El Mayo Zambada, another cartel boss who remained at large. However, overwhelming evidence, including drug seizures, text messages, and testimonies from former cartel operatives, left no doubt about Guzman's role as the leader of the world's most powerful drug trafficking organization. On February 12, 2019, El Chapo was found guilty on all 10 charges, including drug trafficking, money laundering, and murder conspiracies. The verdict carried a mandatory life sentence, and in July 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. He was also ordered to forfeit $12.6 billion, a figure based on the cartel's estimated profits from drug sales. El Chapo was immediately sent to ADX Florence, the most secure federal prison in the U.S., known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, located in Colorado. It houses the country's most dangerous criminals, including terrorists and spies. Guzman is permanently in solitary confinement, with no contact with other inmates and under 24-hour surveillance. His prison conditions are considered so extreme that his lawyers have claimed they violate human rights laws. The cost of bringing El Chapo to justice was immense. The U.S. spent millions on surveillance, intelligence operations, and security forces. The Mexican government spent over $1 billion fighting the Sinaloa cartel, with hundreds of soldiers and police officers losing their lives in the process. The legal fees, trial expenses, and prison security costs added to the total price tag of this historic prosecution. Despite El Chapo's conviction, the Sinaloa cartel remains active, now led by his sons, known as Los Chapitos, and other cartel leaders. The drug trade continues to thrive, with fentanyl, methamphetamine, and heroin still flooding the U.S. market. While his trial was a major victory for law enforcement, the battle against drug cartels is far from over. The El Chapo trial set a new precedent for prosecuting international drug lords, proving that even the most powerful criminals could be held accountable. It remains one of the most expensive and complex legal battles in history, a symbol of the ongoing war on drugs and the cost of fighting organized crime on a global scale.